9 days after we buried my wife, my son stood in the doorway of my machine shed with a realtor sign under one arm and told me the farm had never really been mine, so I should pack what was mine and go. By Friday, there was a new brass padlock on a door I had oiled with my own hands for 40 years, and everything I owned in this world was sitting on the wrong side of it. What my son did not know, what nobody in that family knew except the woman we had just lowered into the ground, was exactly what those 6 quarters of dirt could do without me, and what they could not. My name is Hoyt Dietz. I am 77 years old, and for most of my life I made my living cutting other people's wheat. Before I get into what my children did, do one small thing for an old road hand. Leave a line in the comments and tell me the farthest from your own bed you have ever slept and what it was that carried you there. A war, a job, a wedding, or just a highway you were young enough to follow. I spend 40 summers sleeping in a different county every week, and I will read every answer while the coffee is still hot. Now, let me take you back to the beginning of March, to a church basement in Martin, Kansas, on the day we buried Lorene. It was one of those March days on the high plains when the wind cannot make up its mind, when it shoves you from the west all morning and then swings around to the north just to be contrary. The ladies of the church had put out ham and scalloped potatoes and 3 kinds of Jell-O salad, because that is what grief eats in our part of the world. I sat at the end of a folding table with a paper plate I never touched, and people I had known for 50 years came by one at a time and put a hand on my shoulder and said the things people say. Good people. I do not remember a word of it. What I remember is looking up, somewhere in that long gray afternoon, and noticing that my son Royce was not in the basement. I found him out at the farm when I drove home. His Tahoe was parked in front of the machine shed with the doors open, and he was walking the rows between my combines with his phone held out in front of him, taking pictures. Slow, careful, serial number plates. Hour meters, the headers on their trailers. He did not hear me come in. I stood in the doorway of my own shed in my funeral suit and watched my only son inventory my equipment like an auction hand working a consignment sale 4 hours after his mother went into the ground. My daughter Janelle was up at the house. I found out later she had gone through Lorene's closet that same afternoon with her husband Brent, standing in the hallway saying which pieces of furniture would fit in their place in Wichita and which ones would just go to the sale. I did not say anything to either one of them, and I owe you the truth about why. It was not wisdom. It was not some plan. I was 77 years old, and the woman I had loved for 53 years was gone, and I did not have enough left in me that day to be angry. Grief takes up the whole barn. There is no room in there for anything else, not at first. But I saw it. I want you to know that I saw it, and that something in the back of my mind, some part of me that had spent a lifetime listening to machinery, heard a bearing starting to go. Let me tell you who we were, Lorene and me, so you understand what was actually sitting in that shed. I was not born to land. My father was a custom cutter, what they call a harvester for hire, and I was raised in the cab of a truck following the wheat. If you were not from the plains, maybe nobody ever told you this life existed. Every summer, crews like ours started down in Texas at the end of May when the wheat turns first, and we cut our way north. Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, Nebraska, the Dakotas, sometimes across the line into Canada if the contracts held. A convoy of combines on lowboy trailers, grain trucks, a fuel trailer, a cook trailer, and a crew of boys learning what work was. You slept where the wheat was ripe. You moved when it was cut. 4 months a year, my whole world was 30 feet of header in the next field north. I took over my father's crew at 26 when his back gave out. I ran that run for 40 years, Dietz Harvesting. 2 words painted on the doors of every truck I ever owned, and there was never a banker between here and the Red River who had to ask what they meant. We were not rich people, but iron was ours. Every combine, every truck, every header, bought with cut wheat and paid for with cut wheat. My father used to say a custom cutter is the only farmer who owns everything except the one thing everybody thinks matters, the dirt. The dirt came from Lorene's side. Her father was August Keller, and the Keller ground was 6/4 sections of some of the best hard red winter wheat land in our county, 960 acres. August was a hard old German who did not think much of a harvest tramp courting his daughter, and he told me so, standing in his own driveway, the first summer I came through with the crew. I cut his wheat for him anyway. Cut it clean, cut it fast, and did not overcharge him. It took me 3 summers of that before he would shake my hand, and 2 more before he would let me marry her. And when he died, he did what the old families out here always do. He left the land to Lorene, not to Lorene and her husband, to Lorene, blood to blood. Keller ground stays with Keller blood. That was the saying in that family, and I never once resented it, because I understood it. A man who owns nothing but iron understands better than anybody what it means to want one thing in this world to hold still and keep your name. So that was the shape of our marriage, if you want to see it from the county road. Her name on the dirt, my name on everything that moved. For 40 years, it worked like a watch. 4 months a year, I ran the crew up the plains, and Lorene ran the home place. And when my niece finally told me the truth about lowboy trailers, I sold the run to my foreman, kept the best of the iron, and came home to farm her ground full time. Her ground, my iron, my hands, 20 more years of that. People in town just said the Dietz place, and we let them, because between the two of us there was never any line drawn in the dust. The line only mattered on paper, and we were not paper people, or so I thought. We raised 2 children in that farmhouse. Royce came first. He was a good boy with a quick mind, and I will not stand here and tell you he was born rotten, because he was not. But he hated the work, hated the dust, hated the hours, hated that the boys in town had summers and he had wheat. He left for Wichita the week he turned 19 and made himself into a man who wears soft shoes and talks about opportunities. The last few years, it was real estate developments. Ground, but not the kind you touch. Janelle came 2 years after Royce, and she was her mother up and down, right until she married Brent, who has an opinion on everything and a callous on nothing. They had one boy, Toby. And Toby, I have to tell you about Toby, because this whole story turns on him the way a combine turns on a header pin. Toby was the grandson who came back. Every summer from the time he was 12, he begged a ride out to the farm, and by 15 he was riding the buddy seat through whole afternoons, asking questions his father never asked. The June he was 16, I taught him the morning round. Here is the morning round. Every working day of harvest my whole life, I was in the shed at 6 o'clock with my father's grease gun. It is nothing to look at. A hand-pump grease gun with a wooden handle my father wore smooth before I was born, hanging on the same nail by the shed door for half a century. Before coffee, before breakfast, before anybody so much as started an engine, you walked the machine with that gun and you greased every fitting. The old man made me count them out loud when I was a boy so I could not skip one and lie about it. I made Toby count them too. He thought it was a joke at first, a 16-year-old boy counting grease fittings out loud in a cold shed at 6 in the morning. Then one day he asked me why we greased her every single morning even when she sounded fine. And I handed him down the same answer that was handed down to me. You grease her before she squeals, son, because by the time she squeals, the damage is already in the metal. Remember that. I am going to come back to it. That was our life, the first week of March, when Lorene stood up from the supper table, said the dishes could wait till morning, put her hand flat on my chest the way she had done for 50 years, and went to bed. Her heart quit sometime in the dark. The doctor said she never felt it. I have chosen to believe him, because a man my age gets to choose one or two things, and I chose that. 3 days after the funeral, Lloyd Castile called the house. Lloyd has an office above the drugstore on Main Street, 1 room and a window that looks down on the grain elevator, and he has written the wills and closed the land deals for half this county for 50 years. He was Lorene's lawyer before he was mine. He asked me to come in Thursday morning and to expect Royce and Janelle because Lorene had left a will and it was time it was read. And there was something in old Lloyd's voice on that phone. Careful, level. Like a man walking a load across ice he's already tested who knows exactly where the soft spot is and is not going to tell you until you are standing next to it. Thursday morning I put on my good jacket and climbed the narrow stairs above the drugstore, and my 2 children were already there, sitting in front of Lloyd's desk with an empty chair between them for me. Brent had come too and found himself a spot against the wall by the window, where he stood jingling the keys in his pocket the whole time, like a man waiting for a bank to open. Lloyd put on his readers. He took a single envelope out of a folder, slit it with a pocket knife, and read my wife's will out loud in that dry, unhurried voice of his, the same voice he would use to read a hay contract. I will give it to you the way it landed on me. The Keller ground, all 6-quarter sections, legally described, went to her 2 children, Royce and Janelle, share and share alike. That included the home place quarter, which included the house I had slept in for 53 years and the machine shed standing 80 steps from its back door. And then one more sentence. All the rest and residue of my estate whatsoever and wheresoever I give to my beloved husband, Hoyt. That was it. That was the whole will. 2 gifts, the land to the blood, the rest and residue to me. I sat there and heard the elevator fan humming through the window glass, and I could not have told you what rest and residue meant if you had offered me $100. It sounded like what it sounds like. Leavings, the sweepings off the floor of a life. And judging by the way Royce's shoulders came down easy and the little breath Janelle let out, and the way Brent's keys went quiet against his leg, that is exactly what my children thought it meant too. Royce stood up first. He shook Lloyd's hand like a man concluding a meeting. And then he turned to me, and he was not cruel about it. I want to be fair, he used his reasonable voice, the one he learned in Wichita, and that was somehow worse. Dad, he said, you know this is how the family always wanted it. The farm takes care of Keller blood. You will be taken care of, we will figure all that out, but the townhouse makes more sense for you now, at your age. Take your time. Take till the first of the month if you need it. Pack what is yours. Pack what is yours. You are going to want to remember that sentence too, because before this story is over, my son is going to hear it come back to him in front of a judge. They filed out down the narrow stairs, the three of them, already talking in low voices about appraisals before they reached the street. I was reaching for my hat when Lloyd said my name. He had one more thing in the folder. A second envelope, smaller, sealed, with my name on the front of it in Lorene's handwriting. Not typed. Written in that upright schoolgirl hand of hers that never changed in 50 years. She left instructions with this, Lloyd said. I was to hand it to you privately after the reading. Her words were, he needs to hear the will with the children in the room, and then he needs to read this alone. I asked him if he knew what was in it. He looked at me over his readers, took his time about it, and then said the strangest thing a lawyer has ever said to me. Hoyt, I have practiced law in this town for 50 years, and I will tell you just this much. I have never once buttoned my coat and gone home worried about your wife. I did not open it that day. And I will not dress that up for you either. I carried that envelope in my jacket pocket for 4 days, and I did not open it because opening it meant she was gone, and some doors a man is not ready to walk through just because everybody says it is time. I spent those 4 days packing what was mine. You do not know what a sentence like that costs until you have obeyed it. 53 years in one farmhouse. I packed my clothes, I packed my books and my rifle and the coffee pot. Lorene hated and kept anyway because it was mine before we married. I took the grease gun off its nail by the shed door, and I stood there in that shed with it in my hand, among machines worth more than the house behind me, and I felt like a man stealing from his own life. We had a little house in town, 2 bedrooms on Cottonwood Street, that Lorene and I had bought cheap 30 years back for the crew boys to winter in. That was in the rest and residue too, as it turned out. So that is where I went. My son took till Friday to change the locks at the farm. I know because a neighbor told me. He could not even let the month he offered me run its course. And it was there, on Cottonwood Street, at the kitchen table of a house that still smelled faintly of diesel and other men's cigarettes, that I finally slit that envelope open with my pocket knife, 4 nights after the reading, alone, the way she asked. Folks, whatever you are drinking tonight, set it down a second. 2 pages, both sides, in Lorene's hand. Dated 2 years before she died, the same month as the will. I am not going to read you every private word because some of it belongs to nobody but her and me. But I will give you the part that matters, as close to her own words as I can trust my memory, and my memory does not miss much where Lorene is concerned. Hoyt, she wrote, if you are reading this, then I got the order wrong, and I am sorry, because we both always figured you would go first, and you would have been so much worse at this than I am going to be. She could do that, make you laugh out loud in the middle of the worst week of your life. Then it turned. By now, Lloyd has read the will, and if I know my children, they think they just inherited a farm, and they think you just inherited a drawer full of leftovers. So let me tell you what I did and why I did it, because I did it on purpose, and I did it with Lloyd, slowly, with everything spelled out. The dirt was my father's, and it goes where he wanted it to go, blood to blood. I promised him that, and I am keeping the promise. But Hoyt, the dirt is the only thing that was ever his. Every machine in that shed is yours, bought with your sweat before I ever met you and after. The company is yours. The trucks are yours. The crop growing in my father's dirt this minute was planted by your hands, and it belongs to you. The accounts, the tools, the townhouse, every last bolt and blade, all of it is the rest and residue, and I gave every bit of it to you with 1 line, because 1 line is all it takes when the line is written right. And then, near the bottom of the 2nd page, the part I have read so many times since that I could carve it from memory. The land without you is just dirt that pays taxes. I know exactly what I am handing each of them. I am handing the children a farm that cannot feed them without their father, and I am handing you everything the farm cannot live without. If they are the people I raised them to be, they will see it inside of a week, and they will come to you, and you will all work her together like we always did, and you can burn this letter in the burn barrel and never tell a soul. But if they are not, if they treat you the way I fear a Wichita education has taught my son to treat old men in work coats, then you take this letter to Lloyd Castile and you let the paper do the talking, and Hoyt, you keep your voice level while it does. Do not fight them with your heart. It is the only part of you they know how to hurt. I sat at that kitchen table until past 2 in the morning. I will not describe most of it to you. There is a kind of crying old men do that we are not supposed to admit to, and I did my share of it that night, and I am not ashamed, and we will leave it there. But somewhere in those small hours, sitting with her pages under the kitchen light, the fog started to lift off the field, and I began to see what my wife had actually built. She had not left me leftovers. She had left me the engine and left them the frame. And she had done it in plain sight, in one plain sentence, trusting that greed reads fast and love reads slow. My children thought they had inherited a farm. What they had inherited was 960 acres of dirt and a property tax bill and a father they had just locked out on the wrong side of a brass padlock with every single thing that dirt needed standing in his name. The question my wife left open, the question that let her put to me square, was the same question her father asked himself about a young harvest tramp 60 years ago. What kind of people were my children when it came down to paper? I decided to find out the honest way. I decided to give them the week Lorene predicted and see if they came. They did not come. Somebody else did. 10 days after the reading, a Friday evening, a diesel pickup idled to the curb on Cottonwood Street, and Dean Vogel climbed out of it. Everybody in our county knows the Vogel brothers. Dean and Marty farm north of town, and they farm big. 12,000 acres between owned and rented, 4 combines, their own trucks, their own agronomist. Big, but straight. Their word at the elevator is as good as a check, and their father cut wheat beside my father in the 50s, which out here counts for more than a credit report. Dean stood on my little porch with his cap in one hand and a folder in the other, and he would not come in and sit until I had poured him coffee, because that is how it is done. Then he laid the folder on my kitchen table, turned it to face me, and said, "Hoyt, before my brother and I put our name on anything, I need to hear something from you with my own ears." It was a listing packet. Professionally done, glossy pages, the kind they make in a city office. The Keller ground, all 6 quarters offered as 1 block, and there, printed in a gray box on the second page, in language I have now read more times than any man should, were the words that started the war. Offered turnkey. Sale to include all farm equipment, machinery, vehicles, tools, grain facilities, and personal property located on the premises. A complete, operating farm, ready for day 1. Below that, an equipment schedule, my combines listed by model and year, my tractors, my semis with the grain trailers, my air drill, my sprayer, my headers on their trailers, right down to the shop tools and the welder, serial numbers and all. I recognized my son's photographs, the ones I had watched him take in his funeral suit 4 hours after we buried his mother. They were asking a price for the package north of $4 million, closing date, the 1st of June. And I want you to catch what that closing date meant, because every farmer listening just caught it. 720 of those acres were standing in hard red winter wheat that I had planted with my own drill back in September. Wheat in our county comes ripe in the back half of June. A June 1st closing meant they intended to hand the buyer my growing crop too, green and standing, 3 weeks short of the header. Call it $250,000 worth of wheat sold out from under the man who planted it as a decorating touch. Dean Vogel watched me read the whole packet, and to his everlasting credit, he never said one word until I was done. Then he asked his question. "Hoyt, are you selling your iron?" I looked at that honest, weathered face across my kitchen table, and I gave him the only answer I have ever given anybody in 50 years of doing business on a handshake. "Dean," I said, "if you and Marty want that dirt, that is between you and my children, and it is good dirt, and I will not say a word against the deal. But nobody on this earth can sell you what they do not own. Not one bolt in that shed belongs to the estate. And the wheat is mine, planted before Lorene ever passed. You put your money on that table, you are buying a lawsuit with a farm attached." Dean set his cup down. He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "That is what Marty figured, and that is why I am here instead of at the bank." And then, folks, he said the thing that told me exactly what my children had become in the soft shoes in the city offices. "Hoyt, they had us out to the place Tuesday, walked us through your shed like a showroom. Your boy patted the fender of that 4-year-old combine and told us, 'All this conveys, it is all part of the farm, always has been.' I asked him straight out whose name was on the titles for those trucks. And he laughed, and he said, 'Dad has not driven a semi in years. That is just how the old man's generation did the paperwork.' That is just how the old man's generation did the paperwork. 50 years of my name painted on truck doors, reduced to a paperwork habit. A bearing does not go all at once, friends. It sings to you first, a thin little note under the machine for anyone with the ears to hear it. That was the note. The lie was not desperate yet, but it was confident, and confident lies grow. Monday morning, I climbed the stairs above the drugstore, and I put Lorene's letter on Lloyd Castile's desk, and I said, "Lloyd, she told me that if it came to this, I should let the paper do the talking. So let us go get the paper talking." And here I have to teach you two dull, boring, beautiful words the way Lloyd taught me. Because I promised you when we started that this story would be worth something to you beyond the listening, and this is the first installment. The words are specific and residuary. When a will says, "I give the farm to my children," the law reads that plain and narrow. The farm means the real estate, the dirt, and whatever is nailed to it or growing roots into it. It does not mean the tractors parked on it, any more than leaving somebody your garage means leaving them your car. Machinery, vehicles, tools, crops that get planted and harvested inside a year, money, a company, all of that is personal property, and personal property follows the other clause, the one that sounds like sweepings. All the rest and residue. The lowly leftover clause, friends, is a freight train. Lorene knew it. Lloyd built it. And my children never once slowed down long enough to ask what it carried. Lloyd was the executor of Lorene's estate, and an executor has a duty that does not bend for family feelings. He has to file an inventory with the district court, a sworn list of what the estate actually owns. So, Lloyd filed it. 6 quarter sections of land, legally described. Lorene's personal effects, and her half of our household goods, her small bank account, and nothing else. No combines, no trucks, no drill, no sprayer, no shop full of tools, because the estate did not own any of it and never had. 2 days after that inventory hit the courthouse, my telephone rang at supper time, and it was Royce, and the reasonable Wichita voice was gone. Now, before I pick up that telephone, I am going to stop for the one and only time and ask you for something, because what happens from here on is the part of this story I most need the right people to hear. If you have ever been the one they counted on at 6 o'clock in the morning and could not remember by supper time, then you and I are family of a kind, and that subscribe button is how you pull a chair up to this table for good so the next story knows where to find you. Press it now while the phone is still ringing, because after this call, nothing in this family was ever the same. Royce did not say hello. He said, "What did you do, old man?" He had been to the courthouse. He had read Lloyd's inventory, and somewhere between the courthouse steps and that phone call, he had talked to a lawyer of his own because he came at me with words he had clearly just bought. He said the inventory was a betrayal of the family. He said everybody always understood the equipment went with the land. He said I was senile, confused, being manipulated by a small-town shyster, and that if I thought I was going to sabotage the sale of their farm, he would see me in court. And did I really want to spend Lorene's first year in the ground dragging her name through a lawsuit? I want you to hear what I did, because it is the entire lesson of my 77 years boiled into one sentence. I did not argue with him. You do not fix a bearing by shouting at the machine, and you do not argue with a man who is reading from a script he paid for. Arguing hands him things, words he can bend, heat he can quote, an old man's raised voice he can describe to a judge with a sad shake of his head. I have watched cornered men negotiate all my life, at grain elevators and in equipment lots, and the cornered ones always want you loud. Loud is the only language that makes them feel right. So I said, "Royce, I love you, and every word you just said is wrong, and my lawyer will answer the rest." And I hung up the telephone, and I stood there with my hand still on it, shaking a little, because calm is a thing you do, not a thing you feel. 2 nights later, I found out just how far past talking my children had already gone. Orville Yost farms a couple miles east of the home place. A careful, decent man who has borrowed my shop and my tools 100 times. When I answered the phone, he was so uncomfortable he could hardly get his own name out. He said, "Hoyt, I need to ask you something straight, and I need you to not spare me." He said, "Last week your Royce come by my place pulling your header trailer, the good tandem axle one, and behind his hired man in your grain truck was your air drill on the road hitch. Said the family was cleaning up the estate before the land sale. Said you had moved to town and give it all up, and everything had to go. He offered me the drill and the trailer for $31,000 cash, and Hoyt, I am ashamed to tell you I wrote the check because it was a fair price, and I believed him. And then Sunday at church, Alma tells me what she is hearing about how they done you, and I have not slept right since. Whose drill did I buy? Mine, Orville. You bought my drill from a man who never owned it. Friends, I want to be precise with you right here, because precision is what this channel owes you. When a person sells something that belongs to somebody else and pockets the money, the law has an old plain word for it: conversion. And when the somebody else is past 70, a lot of states, mine included, have newer and harder words for it too. Now, no man on a porch should play at being an attorney, so take the particulars to a real one. But I will tell you this. The moment my son hooked onto that header trailer, this stopped being a family disagreement about what a will meant and became something a county attorney reads with his glasses on. Orville offered to bring both pieces back that same night at his own expense, and I want it on the record of this story that Orville Yost is what neighbors are supposed to be. I told him to sit tight and keep his canceled check somewhere safe, because that little piece of paper was about to be worth a great deal more than $31,000 to me. The next morning I did what I should maybe have done a week sooner. I drove to Hutchinson and hired Marcia Toes. Marcia is an agricultural and estate lawyer, second generation, a Mennonite farm girl who put herself through law school working cattle sales, and she has a way of listening with her pen down that tells you she has already seen your whole story twice before. I put it all in front of her. The will, the letter, the inventory, the listing packet with my serial numbers in it, and Orville's story. She read Lorene's letter twice, all the way through, and when she looked up, I do believe her eyes were shining just a little, lawyer or not, and she said, "Mr. Dietz, your wife left you standing on the best ground I have seen a widower stand on in 20 years of this work. Now let me lay out our road, and let me start with where we will not be driving. We are not going to shout," she said. "We are going to do 3 quiet things with paper, and then, Mr. Dietz, we are going to go get your iron." The first piece of paper was a letter to my children and their lawyer. Not an angry letter, an exhibit list. Every machine in that shed, by make, model, year, and serial number, matched to its title or its bill of sale or its line in the company books, going back 30 years. Lorene had kept that folder squared away in the fireproof box like she kept everything, and when Marcia laid it all out in columns, it did not read like an argument. It read like arithmetic. The letter gave them 10 days to provide access for removal of my property, and it named the drill and the header trailer, and the word conversion sat in that paragraph like a stone in a wheat sample. You could not miss it, and you could not read around it. The second piece of paper went to the Vogel brothers and to the listing broker. 1 page. It said, politely, that the personal property described in the marketing materials was not owned by the estate and was not for sale, and that the growing wheat crop had been planted by me before my wife's passing and would be harvested by me. And here is your second boring, beautiful piece of learning for tonight, friends, and this one is older than Kansas itself. The law has always held that the crop belongs to the man who planted it. It is called the doctrine of emblements, and it goes back centuries to the plain idea that no landlord and no new owner should be able to swallow a growing crop that another man's labor put in the ground. The dirt can change hands in March. The wheat still belongs to the fellow who drilled it in September, and the law walks him right back onto that land to cut it. Judges have been saying that since before there was a courthouse west of the Missouri, my children were not just selling my machinery. They were trying to sell a standing crop the law had already spoken for centuries before any of us was born. The third piece of paper was the one with teeth. Marcia filed an action in our district court with another old word on it, replevin. That is the ancient remedy for exactly one thing, making somebody give back property that is yours. And with the filing, she got something arranged that I confess I had never heard of in 50 years of business, a civil standby. Which means that when you go to recover what a court paper says you can recover, a sheriff's deputy comes along and stands there, calm as a fence post, to keep the peace while you do it. Saturday morning, 7 o'clock, the last week of April, I went and got my iron back. I did not go alone. Word travels in a county like ours faster than any newspaper, and it turns out 50 years of cutting people's wheat honest buys you something money cannot. 2 of my old crew boys, gray as me now, showed up at the co-op with their boots on. Dean Vogel sent Marty and 2 drivers, and Marty grinned at me across the lot and said, "We are not taking sides, Hoyt. We just always wanted to drive your trucks." Orville Yost brought the drill and the header trailer back himself, pulled in at the end of the line like a man returning borrowed sugar. And Deputy Carr sat in his county truck at the head of it all with his coffee and read the padlock, a paper that outranked it. We cut the chain at 7 straight up. And then, folks, the strangest, finest thing of that whole strange spring happened, and I need you to picture it with me, because not a morning has gone by that it has not come back to me. We rolled the shed doors open, and there in the dark sat my combines, and the air was wrong. Shed air in April should smell like dust and cold steel and mouse nests. This air smelled like fresh grease. There was a light on in the back, over the workbench, and standing under it, with a rag in one hand and my spare grease gun in the other, wearing a work coat he'd outgrown 2 years ago, was Toby. My grandson had been letting himself in through the walk door all spring with the key I gave him when he was 16. The whole time that padlock was on the big doors, the whole time his father was selling drills out of my yard and calling my life a paperwork habit. That boy had been coming out after his shifts in town, alone, in the cold, and walking the morning round. Every fitting. He told me later he counted them out loud, because that is how he was taught, and there was nobody there to hear whether he skipped one except the two of us, and neither one of us was going to lie. He looked at me across that shed floor, scared of what his own being there meant, and he said, "Grandpa, you always said you grease her before she squeals." I could not stop any of the rest of it, but I could stop the rust. I am an old man, and I had already done my crying for that year, and I did some more anyway, right there in front of a sheriff's deputy, and any man who would think less of me for it never had a grandson like mine. We ran the iron through the middle of Martin and Convoy that morning. Combines on the lowboys, semis behind, headers on their trailers, the whole works, the way my crews used to roll out headed for Texas every May of my life. People came out of the cafe onto the sidewalk. Old men stood by their pickups with their caps off, not because anybody had died, but because they knew that convoy. They had waited on it every summer for 40 years, and every one of them knew exactly what it meant that it was rolling again, and exactly why. We put every piece of it in Dean Vogel's East Machine Shed, rent paid in wheat, come July, papers signed, because from here on out, everything in my life was going to be written down. My son drove out to the farm that afternoon and found an empty shed, a cut chain coiled neat on the workbench where a courteous man leaves it, and a copy of the Rep. 11 papers on the nail where the grease gun used to hang. And Monday morning, Royce and Janelle did the one thing I could never have arranged for myself, the thing that handed this whole story its ending. They marched down to the district court, and they filed a petition asking a judge to declare that the word farm in their mother's will meant everything. The land, the machines, the trucks, the crop, all of it. They asked the court to read Lorene's one plain sentence their way. They demanded, in writing, a public hearing on what my wife meant. Folks, I could not have baited that hook if I had tried for a year. They built the courtroom themselves, they picked the fight themselves, and they invited the one witness they should have paid any money to keep out of it. Their mother. The hearing came up on a Tuesday morning in the middle of May in the district courtroom on the second floor of our courthouse, the one with the tall windows that look out over the co-op elevator. Judge Hemphill presiding, a square, gray woman who farmed with her husband east of the river before she ever read law, which matters, and you will see why. The benches were not empty. Court in a farm county in May never is quite, but this was different. Orville and Alma Yost, Marty Vogel with his arms crossed, two of my old crew boys, half a pew of church ladies who had loved Lorene for 50 years and had opinions. And in the front row on the other side, my son in a suit the color of new money, my daughter looking small beside him, and Brent, jingling nothing, for once. Their lawyer went first, and I will give the man his due. He made it sound reasonable. Common sense, he kept saying. When plain people say the farm, they mean the whole living operation. The tractors in the yard, the wheat in the field, all of it. One thing, one word. Mrs. Keller Dietz was a farm wife, not a lawyer. Surely she never intended to give her children a farm with the farming taken out of it? Then it was Marcia's turn, and her voice never once climbed above the hum of the elevator fan, and she took that argument apart the way you tear down an engine, one bolt at a time, each piece laid on the bench in order. First, the titles. Certified copies, one after another, trucks and trailers, my name or the company's name on everyone, going back decades. Then the bills of sale for the combines and the drill and the sprayer, my checks, my loans, paid from the harvesting account. Then the company records, Dietz Harvesting, in good standing since before Royce was born. The judge turned those pages slow, and out the tall windows you could hear the elevator fan going, the sound of the actual farm economy of this county carrying on while a courtroom argued about what a farm was. Then Lloyd Castile took the stand, in the same gray suit this county has been seeing at weddings and gravesides for 30 years. He testified that he drafted the will himself, sitting with Lorene 2 years back. That she came in alone, sharp as a tack, with her wishes written out on a tablet in her own hand. And that when he read the draft back to her, she stopped him at the residuary clause and asked him one question. She asked, "Now Lloyd, that line right there is the one that carries everything Hoyt built, is that right? That is the line that holds all his iron and the crop money and the company." And Lloyd testified, under oath, that he told her, "Yes, ma'am, that is the line," and she said, "Then it is written right," and signed it. Their lawyer objected here and there, and the judge let it all in, because when a will gets fought over, what the person meant is the whole ballgame, and Lloyd was the only man alive who sat in the room when the meaning was made. And then Marcia said, "Your Honor, the decedent also left a letter." I watched my children's faces when that envelope came out of the folder. They had never heard of any letter. Royce leaned over to his lawyer, whispering hard, "Janelle just went still, the way her mother used to go still." The judge read it first, silently, to rule on whether it could come in. It took her a long time, longer than the pages needed, and I watched a woman who has sent men to prison without blinking press her lips together twice. Then she said the handwriting ought to be identified by someone who knew it, and Marcia said, "Your Honor, the decedent's daughter is sitting right there." I do not know, to this day, whether Marcia did that out of strategy or out of mercy. I have never asked her, because I am afraid of both answers. Janelle came forward. They handed my daughter her mother's letter and asked, "Do you recognize this handwriting?" She said yes. They asked how, and she said, "Because it is on every birthday card I ever got," and her voice was already going. The judge asked her to read the marked passage aloud, "For the record." And so it was my daughter, not my lawyer, not me, who stood in a public courtroom in the county where she was raised and read her mother's own words into the record. The dirt was my father's, and it goes where he wanted it to go. But every machine in that shed is yours, bought with your sweat. The crop growing in my father's dirt this minute was planted by your hands, and it belongs to you. I am handing the children a farm that cannot feed them without their father, and I am handing you everything the farm cannot live without. If they are the people I raised them to be, they will see it inside of a week. Janelle got that far, right to the edge of the next line, the line about what to do if they were not. And she could not read it. She stood there with the paper shaking in both hands, in front of the judge and the church ladies and her brother, and she looked across that courtroom at me for the first time since the funeral, and she said, out loud, into the record, where it will sit in the county archive for 100 years. "Daddy, I am so sorry." The courtroom did not make a sound. The elevator fan hummed. Judge Hemphill let the silence stand a moment, which I believe was its own kind of ruling, and then quietly took the letter back. The decision came from the bench before dinner time. The word farm in the will devised the real estate, and only the real estate. Every item of machinery, equipment, and vehicles was my property or the company's, never part of the estate at all. The growing wheat crop was mine as a matter of law, planted before the passing, with full right of entry to tend and harvest it. The sale of the drill and the header trailer was a conversion of my property, and the proceeds, that $31,000, were to be turned over within 30 days. And the judge looked over her glasses at my son for a long, level moment and said that the court would leave any further questions about that transaction to other authorities and that Mr. Dietz's restraint in that regard had been noted. Because Marcia had told the court, at my instruction, that I was not asking anybody to prosecute my boy. I want you to understand that choice, because there was not weakness. The law had already given me back everything that was mine. What was left to want from Royce, no courtroom has ever had the power to order. Outside, on the courthouse steps, in the wind, Dean Vogel shook my hand and told me what I already suspected. The turnkey deal was dead, and the brothers had withdrawn entirely, and he wished me a clean harvest, which left my children exactly where their mother's letter always knew this road came out. Owning 960 acres of the best dirt in the county, with the taxes coming due, the buyer gone, harvest 3 weeks off, and not one machine, not one truck, not one calloused hand between the two of them to bring a single bushel of it home. The dirt never fed anybody on its own. It waits for somebody to show up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And now everything and everybody that showed up at 6 belonged to me. I cut the wheat in the back half of June, the way I had cut it every June, except that this time the law itself had walked me onto the ground. Toby took 2 weeks off his job in town and rode the other combine. 720 acres, and the yield came fair, and the checks from the elevator came printed with my name on them, and I banked the crop money and paid the custom rates a tenant would pay for the ground share straight to Royce and Janelle, to the penny, through Lloyd. Both of my children got a check from me that July, calculated fairer than anything they had planned for me. Marcia asked if I wanted a note attached. I said the arithmetic was the note. The rest of that summer, the letter Lorene wrote did its slow work the way water does. Janelle came first. She came alone, in August, and stood on the porch on Cottonwood Street holding her mother's blue casserole dish, the one she had taken from the farmhouse in March, and she said she had come to return it, and then she sat at my kitchen table and cried for the better part of an hour. She told me things I had half guessed, that the turnkey idea was Royce's and the lawyer was Royce's, but that she had gone along with every step of it with her eyes open because the money would have papered over some troubles she and Brent had been hiding even from themselves, and it had been so easy to let her brother's voice tell her it was all normal, all standard, all how estates are handled. She said, the whole time, some part of me knew we were selling your life while you were still alive in it. I just did not let that part talk. I will tell you what I told her, because it is the closest thing to a sermon you will get out of me tonight. I said, Janelle, your mother did not write that letter to catch you being bad. She wrote it hoping to catch you being good, and she missed you by 1 week, and 1 week is nothing in a life. It is not too late to be the people she raised. It is only too late to pretend you already were. She has supper with me most Sundays now. We do not talk about the spring. We talk about her mother, which is different and better. Royce paid the $31,000 on the 29th day of the 30 allowed, and his Wichita development went where such things go without inheritance money to prop it, and I truly take no pleasure in that, and I truly had nothing to do with it. A thing built on money that was never coming was always going to find its level. That is not justice. That is just gravity. What he could not pay was the property tax on 960 acres earning nothing, and so in September, it was Lloyd, steady old Lloyd, who brokered what came next, because neither my son nor I could have dialed the other's number, a lease. The Keller ground, all 6 quarters, cash rented at the county average, with the rent split to Royce and Janelle as the owners, the way their grandfather's blood always intended. And the tenant's name on that lease is Tobias Dietz, 23 years old this spring, farming his great-grandfather Keller's dirt with his grandfather's iron. On a lease his own father had no honest choice but to sign, with me guaranteeing his operating note at the bank and teaching him everything the buddy seat never got to. Some men would call that revenge. I have thought about it a good deal, out on the porch this past winter, and I will tell you what I call it. I call it the machine finally running the way Lorene designed it. Blood on the dirt, iron with the man who earned it. And in between them, binding the two together the way it always has to be bound, one young fellow willing to show up at 6. The morning of Toby's first harvest as the actual tenant, this June just passed, I was out at Dean Vogel's east shed at 5:45, and Toby's pickup was already there, and the lights were already on, and I heard something that stopped me flat in the doorway with my heart going like a boy's. I heard him counting out loud. I stood there in the dark and listened to my grandson count grease fittings alone, number by number, honest to the last one, and then I walked in and I handed him the wooden-handled grease gun, my father's, mine, and now his, and the only thing I could get out was, "She is yours now, son, keep her greased." And Toby looked at it and looked at me and said, "Before she squeals, Grandpa." And neither one of us said anything else because there was nothing else, and the wheat was waiting. His father came out to the field that evening. I watched the Tahoe ease up the turn row and stop 100 yards off, and Royce got out and leaned against the door and just watched his son run wheat in the last light, and he did not come closer, and I did not wave him in. Some doors. A man has to walk through at his own pace. But when Toby ran the hopper out at dusk, I sent him down the turn row with a plate from the cookbox because his grandmother would have skinned me alive if any child of hers stood at the edge of a harvest field and went unfed. Royce took the plate. He said something to his boy I could not hear, and Toby told me later it was, "Your grandpa cuts a cleaner field than anybody I ever saw," which is not an apology. But it is true, and in this family, we have learned to start from true. So that is my story, friends. Now let an old cutter tell you plainly what it was for, and after that, the evening is yours. If you own things, and you love people, do not let the two of them meet for the first time at a funeral. Sit down while you are healthy, with somebody who does this work every day, and write down not just who gets what, but who you mean to be trusted with what, and say the whys out loud to your family while your voice still works. My Lorene wrote one plain sentence with a good lawyer, and that one sentence held like a well to everything my children could throw at it. The families I have watched come apart at elevator scales and estate sales all my life did not come apart over money. They came apart over words like the farm and everything, and you know what your mother would have wanted, words with soft edges that every hungry heart reads its own way. Paper is not cold, folks. Done right, in the daylight, with everyone told, paper is the warmest thing you can leave behind, because it goes on speaking for you when you cannot, in a level voice, to people who are grieving too hard to be fair to each other. And if you are the old man in this story, if you are the one whose name is on the iron, hear me. Keep your titles in one box. Keep your serial numbers wrote down. Tell one person you trust where that box sits. And if the people around you start measuring your life while you are still living it, do not shout, and do not sign, and do not wait for the squeal. See a lawyer that week. Grease it early, friends. By the time she squeals, the damage is in the metal. You can inherit ground. You cannot inherit 6 o'clock in the morning. Somebody in your family is going to learn that the easy way or the hard way, and you, sitting there listening to me tonight, you are probably the only one who can still choose which. The week came off clean this year. The dish is back in its cupboard. The grease gun hangs on a new nail in another man's shed, and it is right where it belongs. Thank you for keeping an old cutter company tonight. Go check on your paper, and go easy on your people as far as truth allows. Good night, friends.